Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for coming to this Zoom presentation on climate change. Is it good or bad? The goals for tonight, we're going to review some of the expert predictions, see how accurate they've been in the past, look at some of the basics of our atmosphere and understand what's in it, and then we're going to look at some benefits of CO2. You never hear this in the news, but carbon dioxide is plant food. The more CO2 we have, the more food we're going to have. Take a look at Earth's history. It's been warmer in the past. And then some of the hysteria and the alarmists. Where did that get started? And then we're going to summarize it all up. So buckle up, here we go. A lot of what I'm basing my talk on is on this book by Gregory Wrightstone, Inconvenient Facts. And he's had 30 years in the field, been studying this. He's also an expert intergovernmental panel on climate change, the IPCC, which is worldwide. And he's an advisor for that. His perspective is, yeah, the Earth is heating up, but that's not bad. So we'll go through that. The other place I got was co2science.org. These are two really good sources from the New American here, the highlighted part. One does not have to be a scientist or even proficient in science to be able to review past predictions and then form an informed opinion regarding the accuracy of these predictions. So let's take a look at some of these predictions. Take a walk down memory lane. 50 years ago, there was the first Earth Day. And let's take a look at some of the concepts they were kicking around. Now, this is a Harvard biologist. He said civilization will end within 15 or 30 years unless immediate action is taken against problems facing mankind. Okay, this is an expert. And then also we've got from a Washington University biologist. We're in an environmental crisis which threatens the survival of this nation. In the New York Times, man must stop pollution and conserve his resources, not merely enhance existence, but to save the race from intolerable deterioration and possible extinction. So this is 50 years ago. We should have been died out according to them. Paul Ehrlich, that's a key player in this game. He wrote The Population Boom, and he was professor at Stanford, Department of Biology, and also the president of the conservation biology. So he's getting paid to study this stuff. This is his job. This is what he does. And he said the death rate will increase until at least 200 million people per year will be starving to death during the next 10 years. So by 1980. And then he also said eco-catastrophe. By 1975, some experts feel that food shortages will have an escalated the present level of world hunger and starvation into famines of unbelievable proportions. Other experts, more optimistic, think the ultimate food population collision will not occur until the decade of the 80s. And they also said 4 billion people, including 65 million Americans, would perish in the Great Die-Off. Okay, 65 million. We've got 330 million right now, so a fifth of our population was supposed to die off. Somewhere between 1980 and 1989. You guys weren't alive then, but I was, and I don't remember 65 million people dying off. And this is the chief organizer of Earth Day. He says, it's already too late to avoid mass starvation. Boy, are they trumpeting the alarmist bells like crazy. Here's a North Texas State University professor. He says, by the year 2000, 30 years from now, the entire world, with the exception of Western Europe, North America, and Australia, will be in famine. And this is from Life. In a decade, urban dwellers will have to wear gas masks to survive pollution. By 1985, air pollution will have reduced the amount of sunlight reaching the earth by 1/2. So I was there in 1985, and it didn't happen. But these are the experts. We should believe them. We should do what they say, right? Okay, and this is Kenneth Watt. He was very instrumental in that first Earth Day. He said, at the present rate of nitrogen buildup, it's only a matter of time before light will be filtered out of the atmosphere and none of our land will be usable. This is Paul Ehrlich again. 200,000 Americans would die in 1973 during the smog disasters in New York and Los Angeles. Has any of this happened? No. Has it even come close to happening? No. Well, this is what he says too, okay? He says, Audubon, that Americans born since 1946 now have a life expectancy of only 49 years old. And I should have been dead a long time ago. But he was wrong. Do you see a trend here? And here's Wattian. By the year 2000, if present trends continue, we'll be using up crude oil at such a rate that there won't be any crude left. Scientist at the National Academy of Sciences. Now, who are we to question a scientist, right? Well, I'm here to tell you, question the scientists. He said we're going to run out of copper shortly after 2000. Lead, zinc, tin, gold, and silver will be gone before 1990. So he's making a 20-year prediction, and then he's wrong. But he's a scientist. We should believe him, right? Wrong. Okay, Senator, here we go. Here's this, Kenneth Watton again. If present trends continue, the world will be about 4 degrees colder for the global mean temperature in 1990, but 11 degrees colder in the year 2000. This is about twice what it would take to put us into the ice age. See, back in the 70s, they weren't worried about global warming. They were worried about global cooling. They were being alarmists about that. And they were wrong. So again, we're going to take a look at global or climate change, all right? So again, this 1989 prediction, this is a UN official. Don't question him. He knows what he's talking about. So he said, entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. Coastal flooding and crop failures would create an exodus of eco-refugees, threatening political chaos. Again, you guys weren't alive for that, and I was, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. He made a prediction 11 years out. That's kind of a trend. We got 10 or 11 years, maybe 12 years to change something, but we got to do it now. Well, we didn't do it, and he was wrong. Oh, this one's a good one. You guys, I hope you are familiar with PragerU. They got some really good stuff on there. Again, this is the quote that we just did. The entire nations would be wiped out. But I just bring this up because they have studies, they have videos out there. And I really like this one that has to do with what we're going through today. It's how big should government be, left versus right. I encourage you to watch that when you get time. Because the bigger the government gets, the smaller our freedoms get. And I fear, see, the left fears big business and the right fears big government. And I fear government way more than business because Coca-Cola can't come to my house and haul me off to jail or put me in a concentration camp, but big governments can. So just something for you guys to think about. Okay, did we learn from our mistakes? No, this was in 2005. The United Nations predicted that climate change would create 50 million climate refugees by 2010. So a 5-year prediction. Were they right? No. And they had this on the map. This is, the small dots. These are islands that are going to be wiped away. If you can just look around at all those small dots in the Caribbean, dots in the Pacific, they're all going to be gone according to this prediction. Small islands, some will disappear completely and they're going to be eco-refugees. Well, that's not the case. Their populations are growing like crazy. In the Bahamas, population growth increased 300,000. Okay, in St. Lucia, it increased 5%. Okay, but did we learn our lesson? Do they ever apologize for these bad predictions? This is 2011. It gives us 9 years to change to save the world. In 2020, the UN has projected that we will have 50 million environmental refugees again. So they just kick the can down the road 10 years. They have a history of being wrong. They never apologize. And so just in summary, Al Gore predicted the North Pole would be totally ice-free by 2013. 2013 came and it was at the highest level this time since 2006. So it's growing. But don't take my words for it. Listen to Al himself.
The entire North Polar ice cap during some of the summer months could be completely ice-free within the next 5 to 7 years.
7 years ago, in a real inconvenient truth, former Vice President Al Gore once famously claimed the North Pole ice cap would be ice-free by now due to climate change. But scientists say the ice cap has actually expanded and is now twice the size of Alaska.
You said unless we took, quote, drastic measures, the world would reach a point of no return within 10 years, and you called it a true planetary emergency. We're 11 years.
Yeah, and it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Has he apologized? Let's just look at some of his predictions. Okay, rising sea levels was inaccurate and misleading. It was even discovered. He even bought a beachfront mansion. So did Obama. Okay, increased tornadoes. That's declining. New ice age in Europe. No, it never happened. Sahara's drying up. Nope, it's actually getting greener now. And we'll talk about why in a few minutes. The massive flooding in China didn't happen. Melting ice, Arctic didn't happen. Polar bear extinction, no, they're increasing. Temperature increase due to carbon dioxide. We're at this big pause right now. It's not increasing. And he thought there'd be more super hurricanes, but no. The Earth would be a true planetary emergency within a decade unless drastic actions to reduce greenhouse gases, but it never happened. Okay, and has he ever apologized? No, he's making a boatload. Okay, despite the wild claims 5 years ago, the establishment press has unsurprisingly refused to report that Gore and his fellow alarmists were proven embarrassingly wrong. No apologies from Gore have ever been forthcoming either, and none of the scientists who made the ridiculous predictions quoted by the BBC has apologized or lost his taxpayer-funded job. In fact, almost unbelievably, the establishment press is now parroting new claims from the same discredited experts suggesting that the Arctic will be ice-free by 2016, and it was not. Even UN warmists have been forced to concede that they don't know what is going on in their climate models that predicted melting should have been proven so wildly off the mark. Their models don't work, but they're all alarmist. It's their way to get a bigger government. And this is at Glacier National Park. It said that the glaciers would be gone by the year 2000, and this was taken in 2017. And the glaciers are still there. So they have to scurry around taking these signs down. I don't even know if they have the budget for it. So there might be signs like this. Have we learned from the past, or are we still making dire predictions, 12 years to save the world? Well, let's talk about recent comments.
Climate change is different because we have an expiration date. And the IPCC report says we've got 12 years to turn it around. 12 years.
12 years. Did she look like she was joking? No, she looked pretty serious, didn't she? And what she's quoting is this UN report. Only 10 years left. That's all we got, 11 years left. And that was in 2019. And she took so much flack for this that she said, oh, I was just kidding. Well, first she doubles down. Okay, this is April 2017. Climate change is here and we've got a deadline. 12 years left to cut emissions in half. That's it. Okay, now May of 2019. She says, like the world ending in 12 years thing, you'd have to have the social intelligence of a sea sponge to think that's literal. So now she's saying that it was just humor and dry and sarcasm. So she backed it back when she looked like a fool. But does this sound like she's joking?
Millennials and people, and Gen Z and all these folks that come after us are looking up, and we're like, the world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change. And your biggest issue is how are we going to pay for it? And this is the war. This is our World War II.
See, ideas have consequences, and they want to do what they can to slow down the CO2. And Bill Gates wants to reduce the population. I didn't put that clip in here, but it's linked to a vaccine. He wants to get the number of people down. Okay, but then again, this UN report is still out there. We're the last generation that can prevent irreparable damage to our planet, says the president, stressing that 11 years is all that remain. Well, we've heard this. They've been saying the sky's falling for 50 years. We got 10 years to fix it. They've been saying this every decade, and they've been wrong every time. So before we revamp our whole energy sector to save the world, let's wait for them to make an accurate prediction. That's my opinion, personally. So in summary, 1977, they were talking about the ice age that was coming, and then 30 years later, they're talking about how warm it's going to get. It's linked to sunspots, not the CO2. Okay, so in summary, let's take a look at some of these, and we'll look at some of these to come too. Okay, we'll be in an ice age, didn't happen. Global cooling will cause world war by 2000, didn't happen. 1980, global warming and rising sea level will wipe entire nations off the map, and didn't happen. We have 5 to 10 years to save the rainforest, didn't happen. Something will be gone in 10 years. Emily, your thing is over the thing. Okay, snow will soon be off, thing of the past, didn't happen. Global warming will cause fewer hurricanes, whatever. The Arctic will be ice-free by 2013, didn't happen. And then the science is settled. We're hearing that? Science is settled. Well, science is never settled. If it's settled, it's not science. And if it's science, it's not settled. There's consensus is not how science works. Okay, so that's the predictions, and they've not happened. So let's look at some of the basics. What's in our atmosphere? 99.97% is made of 4 gases. And this is where I would ask my audience to see if they could guess what gases they are. But since you're not able to talk, I'll show you. It's argon, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and oxygen. And I would ask, well, which one do you think is the most? And it's nitrogen, 78%. What's next? Oxygen, 21. What's next? So between those two, you got 99% of the atmosphere, okay? And then 0.93% is argon. So of that 0.1%, 0.93 of it is argon. So how much is carbon dioxide, what we're all freaking out over? 0.4%, 4 parts per million. We've had up to 6,000 parts per million in the atmosphere in the past. So, I mean, it doesn't even show up on the graph. And we're freaking out over it. And we shouldn't be. It's like we're worried about our gas tank overflowing when it's an eighth full. Because we've had 8 times more CO2 in our atmosphere, at least. Okay, so let's not worry about it. Okay, now let's take a look. If greenhouse gases are bad, you know, if we didn't have our atmosphere, if we didn't have greenhouse gases, Earth would be below zero. It'd be zero all the time. So we need some of that atmosphere to keep us warm and the hospitable zone. Venus has global warming. They've got 800 degrees there. Of course, it's 96% carbon dioxide, where ours is 0.04%. There's a difference. Then Mars doesn't have any atmosphere to speak of, and their below average temp is minus 67. So why they want to go to Mars is crazy. It's crazy. Okay. Okay, so what's the main greenhouse gas? It's water vapor. It's not carbon dioxide. It's water vapor. 90% of it is water vapor. And you'll notice that in the winter, if it's cloudy out, it's a lot warmer in the morning. And if it's not cloudy out, it's a lot colder in the morning. You could have the same temp in like Alabama, where it's hot and muggy, and the same temp in Arizona, where there's no moisture, and it's going to feel differently. So anyhow, carbon dioxide is not the main greenhouse gas. So that's an inconvenient truth. Okay, the warming effect of CO2 declines as its concentration increases. I was going to have a graph of this, but I didn't get it in there. They're saying, well, if we get too much, if it keeps accumulating, then it's going to be a problem. Well, not necessarily. No, it's not going to have the same warming effect. Okay, now this is the main thing of the whole thing. And I was talking to a guy today down at the protest, and he was protesting the protest, and I was stopped in traffic. It took me like 20 minutes to go 2 blocks, and he was standing on the corners. We were talking back and forth. Interesting situation. You know, he didn't want people to die, and I brought up, should we make the speed limit 30 miles an hour so nobody dies? And he couldn't. It was, well, you know, we don't want to. What's your point? It's like, well, there's risk with everything. You know, and he's all for life, and it's like, oh, are you against abortion too? And well, no, and so he was even for the mom. Any mom can kill the kid if she wants, even if it's after it's born. It was just bizarre, a weird kind of thing. But he brought up climate change, and I should have brought up. Do you know what carbon-14 or carbon dioxide is? It's plant food. Plant food. And our plants aren't going to survive with less than 150 parts per million. And we had 400. We're getting dangerously low of carbon dioxide. We should be increasing it. And the more food we get, the more CO2, the more food we'll get. And we'll get to that in a little bit. So this shows a graph of how much CO2 we've had in the atmosphere in the past. Now, I disagree with this millions of years perspective, but it does show that there's more CO2 in the past. You know, we got 400 parts per million right now, and there used to be 6 times that amount. Okay, so I encourage you to get that book and study it out. So this is the key right here. Carbon dioxide is plant food. The more carbon dioxide we have, the more food we're going to have. See, our plants and our trees are starving at 400 parts per million. Gary Parker said you could have 10 times that amount. And that's what they do at greenhouses. They pump in carbon dioxide so the plants grow better. And this is that CO2 science thing. You know, this is where they've done the experiments, and this is on trees. This is oak trees right there. Notice how if they increase the parts per million by 300, so it went from 400 up to 700, it's going to have 278% increase in the biomass. And they do studies for this for pine too, 200%, 60%. So the plants are going to grow better. And there's another one, 265%. This was off of that CO2 science one. They got great resources there. We get more cotton, be better for industry. It would also help feed the people worldwide. So the plants will grow faster with less water. You'll have bigger crops. And you have less irrigation, less erosion, and more soil moisture. We'll talk about that in a bit. And the natural repellents to fight insects, insect predators. So there's a lot of these benefits to having more CO2. Okay, so more CO2 means more moisture in the soil. And why is that? Because the plants don't have to open up their pores on the underside of their leaves to absorb CO2. If there's more CO2 in the air, then those pores are open for a smaller amount of time, so there's less evaporation. Less evaporation means more moisture in the plant, more moisture in the soil. And so there's a win-win-win everywhere here. Okay, more CO2 helps feed more people worldwide. If it goes from 400 to 7 parts per million, it would increase the average growth of plants 46%. So just think, now let's just look at wheat. A lot of people eat wheat. Just think if we had more carbon dioxide, we'd have 38% more wheat. And if we had, instead of 400, if we had 600 parts per million, we'd have 63% more wheat. So there'd be less hungry people. How about rice? A lot of people eat rice. You know, at 300, so at 700 parts, it'd be 34%. And then at 1,000 parts per million, it'd be 141% more food that we'd have. You know, it just bothers me that this green idea is eating up our farmland. Have you seen these solar fields going up all over the place? That's eating up farmland. That's less food for us to eat. Less places for us to build houses. And it's not necessary at all. Okay, peanuts would increase the 53%. Beans would increase. Well, there's one of them, 104%. And there's benefits for increasing the CO2. This is citrus fruit, up to 69%. And so what we're seeing, contrary to the global alarmists, is the Earth is greening with this more CO2. 50% of the planet is greening, while only 4% is drying up, decreasing. So how did we get to this alarmist thing? It's the hockey stick graph. That's a graph that goes level, and then it spikes up. And it's a false graph. It ignores the cooling and the heating that we've had in the past, and it's been thoroughly discredited. And yet that was one of the foundational pieces for Al Gore's Inconvenient Truths. It's one that they bring up a lot at the UN. So understand that. I don't have time to rip it apart thoroughly, but I'll just give you the highlights. So it eliminates the medieval warm period from 950 to 1250 AD. And it also eliminates the Little Ice Age, 1250 to 1800 AD. It's been discredited. Man's hockey stick has indeed been substantially discredited. Who said that? It's a PhD geologist from New Zealand's Institute of Geological and Nuclear Sciences. We know that the hockey stick is fraudulent, says a professor of chemistry out at Idaho State. Okay, from 1944 to 1976, CO2 rose while temperatures fell. See, CO2 is not the driving force of this. It's more of a result of the oceans warming up. Okay, if present tense continue, and we talked about this before, 11 degrees colder by 2000, this is about twice what it would take to put us in another ice age. So they were worried about the ice age until 1976. Okay, and then their predictions fell flat on their face. Then they predicted global warming, and they were freaking out about that. And then there's been this 20-year pause where they can't explain it. Okay, the facts have emerged in recent years and months from research into past ice ages. They imply that the threat of a new ice age must now stand alongside nuclear war as a likely source of wholesale death and misery for mankind. This is from 1975. So they've been wrong. Okay, this is settled science back then. It's not a question of whether the next ice age would come, but when. So they've been wrong. We're lucky that there's scientists who aren't going for this alarmist propaganda. Over 31,000 scientists, including almost over 9,000 PhDs, have said that there's no convincing scientific evidence that human release of carbon dioxide, methane, or other greenhouse gases is causing or will, in the foreseeable future, cause catastrophic heating of the Earth's atmosphere and direct disruption of the Earth's climate. Moreover, there is substantial scientific evidence that increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide produce many beneficial effects upon the natural plant and animal environments of the Earth. See, most plants and animals do better in the heat instead of the cold. So they've signed all these. How many signed it in Minnesota? 348 signers in Minnesota. I'm going to be speaking in Florida next month, and they've got us beat by almost twice as many. 1,500 signers in Florida. So at least they can speak out about this and not lose their job, not like the creationists. Okay, so society. For human advancement, warmer is better. Minoan warm period, 1500 to 1200 BC, was the Bronze Age. That's where we got the wheel, writing, bronze smelting, mountain passes became accessible, allowing trade, great cities and civilizations rose. And then the Dark Ages came. That's the Vandal minimum. That's where it got colder. And 1200 to 250 BC, crop failures, undernourishment, population loss. Yeah, temperatures plunged in 800 BC. And that was bad for society. And then it got warmer, the Roman warm period, 250 to BC to 450 AD. Iron Age, got mathematics, philosophy, arts, agriculture, olive trees in the Rhine Valley, citrus trees in North England. Oh, by the way, we got Jesus Christ then too. The first Chinese emperor, the Han Dynasty. And then the Dark Ages came. Okay, that's when it got cold again. Famine, Black Plague, decline in population, survival over advanced. People are just worried about living, not so much as advancing society. Rome and Han's empires fell, political turmoil. Then it got warmer. The medieval warm period, that's when you had the Renaissance and universities and castles and cathedrals and the Magna Carta. And they settled in Iceland and Greenland. That's interesting there too. The medieval warm period, there's prosperous, optimistic, citrus fruits and vineyards farther north than today. Vikings buried the people. That's in stuff that's now permafrost. Okay, so go into that CO2science. I think it's .org for more historical data. Okay, then the Ice Age came. It got colder and crop failures and famine and population decline and the Baltic Sea froze and the Vikings abandoned Greenland and Black Death and the Great Famine. And then the Little Ice Age. In Norse mythology, talks about 3 years without summer. And the Thames River froze in England. The last time in 1814. So it's been warmer ever since. Okay. Now, if you are a history denier, like the guy who made that hockey stick, the graph, a return to lower temperatures would likely lead to a drop of human population. And many people want that. Anybody ever been out here? These are the Georgia Guidestones. So in 8 different languages, it says this: maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a well-funded idea in 8 different languages, so it must be international. And this is a guy, he says, writer for Earth First Journal, says the extinction of human population may not only be inevitable, but a good thing. So he'd go along with that Georgia Guidestone thing. Okay, and that's kind of what I'll stay on topic here. Okay, now take a look at this graph. The blue line going up is the amount of CO2 emissions. Okay, now notice that the temperature isn't going up those last, the temperature's been pretty steady, even though CO2 has been going up at a steady rate. It was 365 parts per million, and now it's 400 parts per million. And the temperature has not really varied. Okay, the warming stopped as CO2 relentlessly increased. If you can't explain the pause, that's what they call what we're in right now, it's not increasing. If you can't explain the pause, you can't explain the cause. Okay, and this is temperature from 400 years ago, 350 years ago. It was starting to warm up before the CO2 started to be released. This has to do with the sunspots. The more sunspots, the hotter it gets. The fewer sunspots, the cooler it gets. There's a direct correlation with that. I think it was in the last Acts and Facts of the Creation Journal. I apologize, but I'm going to get a graph like that in here. Okay, warming following the Little Ice Age predated the recent rise in CO2 in coal-fired plants and SUVs. So the fact is, temperatures have changed throughout human history. I mean, the Ice Age melted without man's power plants and SUVs. And I contacted the author, that Gregory Wrightstone. I asked him about the millions of years thing. And he doesn't go along with the young Earth. And I had an interesting email conversation with him. But, he's got eat the meat, spit out the bones. What caused the ice age was the flood, the global flood, and what caused it to melt was the atmosphere cleaning out from the aerosols. But that's on another video. You can go into Noah, what caused the flood, or Noah, the Ark and the flood. That's another one you can talk about that. For most of Earth history, it has been 18 degrees warmer than today. So it was nothing to freak out over. Okay, and this guy from the meteorological office says the data don't matter. We're not basing our recommendations for reduction in carbon dioxide emissions upon data. We're basing them upon the climate models. Kind of reminds me of the coronavirus models, which said we're supposed to have 2 million people die. What happened to that? They keep inching it back and back and back. The guy who made the first model that they were freaking out over, he said 500,000 people would die in the United Kingdom, and he's dialed that back to 20,000. And it's these guys who make models can make them say whatever they want them to say. Okay, so just take those models with a grain of salt. Let's see, this is Climate Modeler says, rather than seeing models as describing literal truth, we ought to see them as convenient fictions which try to provide something useful. See, they want the green energy. They want that, so they'll cook the books to make it appear that it's needed. And they've overstated their warming up to 2 or 3 times too much. Okay, so then what are some of the other alarmist points? We're going to have more heat waves with the global warming, but now they changed it to climate change. And actually, there's a steady trend of less heat waves. Again, it's linked to sunspots, not CO2. What else do they get upset about? Oh, the polar bears are going to go extinct. Well, guess what? There's more than there's ever been. They do better when it's warmer, too. Okay, what's this one? Oh yeah, we're going to get a lot more forest fires, but we're getting less forest fires. And that's because of the CO2. The plants don't have to open up their pores as much. There's more moisture in the ground. Okay, and then the rapid sea level rising. Well, that happened after the flood when the ice age melted. I disagree with the numbers at the bottom of the graph, but the data shows that, yeah, the oceans were a lot lower during the ice age. There were 125 meters lower, so that's 375 feet lower. And we see that's how you get stalactites in caves that are underwater today. They had to be dry for that stalactite to form. There was a cedar forest down in Alabama, out in the ocean, 60 feet deep. And there's a lot of buildings that are about 30 feet deep too. And buried, the sea rose. That's right. And it didn't take our coal mining to do that. Okay. Marauder, the researcher at the Royal Observation in London, noticed the extreme cooler weather in 1670 to 1715 coincided with the decline in solar activities. That's what I've been talking about, the sunspots. Okay, so why does this matter? Because policies, this information impacts policies that impact our life. Over in Europe, in England, they have this Green Deal, and then energy got more expensive, so then people can't afford to heat their house in the winter. So now you got people dying from cold because they can't afford to heat their house because of the green energy. So people are dying from the solution instead of the cause. Okay, and it also brings about the Paris Climate Agreement. Okay, models predicted that a small rise in CO2 concentration altering the atmosphere by just 1 part in 2000 by the end of the century would cause a dramatic and harmful warming of the world's weather. This is what they're saying. Okay, and the solution to global warming under the Paris Agreement would cost people of the world $110 trillion by 2100. So it's a way to make government bigger, a way to tax us more. And according to Bloomberg, 2016, that 100 trillion would reduce global temperatures 1/6 of a degree Celsius, or 1/3 of a degree Fahrenheit. Is it worth it? No, it's not, because CO2 is not bad. It's a good thing. Okay, imagine the enormous pressure on President Trump to keep the United States in the Paris Climate Accord. Yeah, he took a lot of pressure and a lot of heat, but it's probably the smartest thing he has ever done. Worldwide indignation, scorn were heaped on him after his decision to withdraw from the agreement. Yet it was the correct decision and a courageous one. Right. See, the elites were mad at him because they've got this master plan, but he wants to make Americans happy, not the elites. He's not a globalist, and I thank God for that. He's taking a lot of heat. Every time he wakes up, they're trying to get rid of him in a different way. Okay, so throughout history, global warming and cooling were driven by natural forces. Appealing to imaginary consensus is a crutch for lame science, and that is what Al Gore does. He's the first one to implement the crutch, the consensus. And this is the summary. Okay, we're almost wrapping up. The Earth is becoming greener and has fewer extreme weather events. The increased CO2 is lengthening growing seasons and more moisture in the soil, increasing crop yields. Humanity and Earth are prospering wildly, not in spite of rising temps and CO2, but because of them. Today, forecasts are uncertain, but we are supposed to spend trillions of dollars on policies that have failed again and again to make accurate predictions. And we're doing the same thing with the coronavirus. The same thing. Okay. All right. So what historians will definitely wonder about future centuries is how deeply flawed logic obscured by shrewd and unrelenting propaganda actually enabled a coalition of powerful special interests to convince nearly everyone in the world that carbon dioxide from human emissions was dangerous, plant-destroying toxin. It's not a toxin. It's a natural. We give off carbon dioxide every time we breathe, and plants breathe it in. It will be remembered as the greatest mass delusion in the history of the world that carbon dioxide and the life of plants was considered for a time to be a deadly poison. Of course, that was before this coronavirus destroyed 22 million jobs and put the world on lockdown. So that might even give it a run for the money. Okay, and this is from the UN, their intergovernmental policy or panel on climate change. They said, in climate research and modeling, we should recognize that we are dealing with a couple nonlinear, chaotic systems, and therefore the long-term prediction of the future climate states is not possible. It's not possible. And they admit it. This is somewhat ironic that our contribution of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere may actually be helping to delay the next ice age from starting. And I would agree with that. Okay, before climate science became politicized, warm periods were referred to by scientists as climate optima because for almost all species on Earth, warmer is better than colder. But then it became politicized, and now you can get grants trying to prove that it's right. Be careful I always tell people, is somebody benefiting financially from the advice they're giving you? And I always take that with a grain of salt. So you got these climate alarmists that are making money trying to prove this model. And you've got these vaccine alarmists trying to prove that model. Okay, consensus opinion promoted by climate apocalypse proponents is constantly at odds with reality. The first and most important conclusion is that the correct policy to address the non-problem of man-made global warming is to have the courage to do nothing. Just let it roll. Let it roll. Let's have cheap energy. Let's not worry if we get more CO2 in the atmosphere. Good for us. More plants, more food, more moisture, lots of benefits. So in reviewing real quickly, we talked about how the expert predictions have yet to be right. We've got 5 decades of them saying the sky is falling in 10 years, and they're always wrong. The basics is CO2 is carbon dioxide is only 0.04% of our atmosphere. We can have 6 times that amount easily. Okay, we're worrying about the gas tank overflowing when it's an eighth full. The benefits of CO2, and I try and tell this to everybody, is it's plant food. The more CO2 we have, the more food we'll have, the less people will starve. And then the history, we've had hot and cold in the past, and it's always been linked to sunspots, not CO2. And this hysteria of climate change is hysteria. It's not based on reality. It's based on models that are used to predict what they want it to predict. So in summary, I encourage you guys to, these are the failed predictions in the past. I encourage you to get the book, Inconvenient Facts. It's excellent. You're going to see it, besides the millions of years, but you're going to see how CO2 is our friend. It's not something to be scared about. And you can also, if you get time, go into Google. This is on YouTube. Just search the CO2 equation with Bill Gates. CO2 equation, Bill Gates. Is probably there's a 3-minute segment where you'll see it pop up, the CO2. CO2 equals P, the number of people, times energy, the amount of energy they use, times what kind of energy, and times the carbon credits. All right. And so he's looking at that P1. How can we get this to go as close to zero as possible? He wants to look at P, reduce the population. And in that talk, at about the 3-minute mark, 2 or 3 minute mark, he says, yeah, vaccines and healthcare can help reduce population 15%. And so there's something with vaccines. And if you look up Bill Gates and Robert Kennedy Jr., he just came out with a with a write-up of all the vaccines that Bill Gates has put on countries. And one of the countries, I think it was Kenya, he sterilized millions of women. They were getting some shot like for whatever it was, tetanus or something, and it had sterilized them. If he wants, that's one way he could do it. So encourage you, get other sources, was what I'm saying. Don't believe the alarmist headlines who are being funded by people with ulterior motives, and look behind the headlines. So this book is a good one. This website's an excellent one. Man, I was having so much fun going through this stuff a month ago. So much fun. And then they shut everything down, and I started to see our constitutional rights and our freedoms being destroyed. And it's like, and I'd see the headlines, and then I'd always post underneath them, like on St. Cloud Times or Minneapolis Tribune or WJON or Fox 9 or something. Underneath the coronavirus headlines, they always say how many people died. I'll always comment, and I'll make a graphic if they let me post it, how many people recovered. Yesterday, 80 people recovered from coronavirus. Did you hear about that? And 7 people died. So now there's a total of 94 out of 5.7 million people have died from coronavirus. 99.998% of Minnesotans did not die. And if you're under 87, 99.999 of us didn't die, because half of the people that died were over 87 years old. And it's just boggling to me. But my fear is that they're going to try and force a vaccine on everybody, and that's going to be scary. You have your immunization card before you can get your driver's license. So again, look behind the headlines. CO2 science will do it. And with what's going on right now, I encourage people to watch High Wire with Del Bigtree. His last 3 or 4 have been amazing. He's talking about stuff, and then 2 weeks later, the press will start talking about it. He's been in this game for probably 20 years, and he's the guy who did Vaxxed, so he's seen this corruption up close and personal. He's seen people going from the CDC, like Julie Gerberding. She went right into Big Pharma, and now she's just sold $9 million worth of stock. And my prediction is that's what's going to happen to Fauci and Birch, too. They're going to make millions in Big Pharma. So that's personal opinion. We've covered it all. And are there any questions? I took some rabbit trails, but thanks for bearing with me.